Isaac Singer built the most famous sewing machine on earth. He also fathered 26 children by 5 women, kept 4 secret families in the same city, and fled the country to escape a bigamy charge. The company that carried his name stood as an American giant for 148 years. Then a pile of foreign debt and a private equity firm finished it off. And today, not one Singer sewing machine is built in the United States. This is how the greatest name in American manufacturing was wrecked. Isaac Merritt Singer entered the world on October 27, 1811, in Pittstown, New York. The youngest son of a German immigrant and a mother who died when he was still a child. Poverty shaped his early years, but restlessness drove him out by age 12, first to his brother's machine shop in Oswego, then onto the road. For decades, he drifted between towns, earning his keep as a traveling Shakespearean actor and a mechanic, known as much for his booming stage presence as for a temper that could clear a room. Even before sewing machines, Singer's hands shaped invention. In 1839, he patented a rock drilling machine, proof that his mind worked in iron and leverage long before thread and fabric. Boston, 1850. Singer, now in his late 30s, walked into Orson Phelps' shop and saw a sewing machine that barely functioned. The idea was there, but the machine stuttered and groaned. Its bent needle and hand crank no match for real work. Singer watched, tinkered, and then rebuilt. His version used a straight needle that plunged down, not sideways, and a foot treadle that freed both hands. Simple, brutal improvements that made the machine usable for the first time. The Burlington Free Press would boast that his design could sew 500 to 1,500 stitches a minute, with the length of each stitch adjustable at will. On August 12, 1851, the U.S. Patent Office granted Singer patent number 8294, and with it, a future. That same year, he joined forces with Edward Clark, a Manhattan lawyer, to form I.M. Singer and Company. The partnership was legal and practical, but the machine itself was the real revolution. A device finally ready for the work of everyday people, born from a life spent in motion and struggle. What does it mean when the world's most useful tool is built by a man who could never settle in one place? In the heart of Manhattan, Isaac Merritt Singer juggled not only machines and patents, but 4 separate households, each under a different name, each unaware of the others. By 1860, he had fathered around 26 children with 5 women. A web of loyalty and deception spun across the city's neighborhoods. The arrangement was as ambitious as any of his inventions, but it could not last. One afternoon that year, a chance encounter between 2 of his families in a carriage on the street turned private chaos into public scandal. The New York press pounced, splashing details of Singer's double lives and crowded nurseries across their pages. Bigamy and adultery charges soon followed, dragging his personal affairs into the courts and threatening to engulf the company he had just built. The legal battle was brutal. Singer's name, once celebrated for mechanical genius, became shorthand for scandal. By 1862, facing prosecution and mounting public outrage, he boarded a ship for London, leaving behind lawsuits, creditors, and a city that now watched his every move. In Europe, he found a fresh start. In 1863, he married Isabella Eugénie Boyer, a French-American model 20 years his junior. With her, he would have new children and build a grand estate, But the wounds in New York never fully closed. The man who put sewing machines in American homes had become a fugitive from his own success. What happens to a company when its founder is forced to vanish into exile? Edward Cabot Clark stepped into the breach as Isaac Singer's name became a byword for scandal. While the inventor vanished across the Atlantic, Clark stayed behind, quietly taking the reins of the company's daily business. In 1856, Clark introduced something almost as transformative as the sewing machine itself: the installment plan. $5 down, a few more each month, and a family could take home a machine that once seemed forever out of reach. This was more than a sales tactic. It was the first time a major American company let ordinary people buy on credit, a system known as hire purchase. The numbers told the story. Machines began leaving the factory not just for the parlors of the wealthy, but for kitchens, boarding houses, and farmsteads. Clark pushed advertising to new extremes, blanketing newspapers and shop windows with promises of speed, thrift, and modernity. Trade-in deals recycled older models, widening the circle of buyers. Meanwhile, a global sales force fanned out across continents, making Singer one of the most recognized names on Earth. Credit built the empire, but it also planted a question that lingers. What does it cost when the heart of American industry beats to the rhythm of monthly payments instead of the pride of paid in full? And when the bill finally comes due, who truly owns the future? On the edge of Newark Bay, the Singer factory at Elizabethport rose from marshland in 1863, a red brick answer to the ambitions of a restless age. At first, it was only a modest plant, but the hunger for machines and the promise of steady work drove it outward year after year. By the dawn of the 20th century, the complex sprawled across 113 acres, a miniature city of industry with 48 buildings joined by iron rails and covered walkways. Inside, belts spun overhead, driving steel lathes and presses that thundered from dawn until dusk. The air was thick with oil and the rhythm of labor, each machine feeding the next. Each worker, a single cog in a vast, humming engine. At its height, more than 40,000 men and women drew paychecks here. The plant's floor space stretched over 1.4 million square feet, an area large enough to swallow entire city blocks. 10,000 sewing machines stood in rows for assembly or testing, destined for kitchens, shops, and sweatshops in every corner of America. Raw iron and finished goods flowed in and out on the company's own dock, stitched into the global fabric by rail and steamship. Sister factories rose in Kilbowie, Scotland, and Podolsk, Russia, echoing the same relentless drive. Over it all, the Singer Building in Manhattan loomed, a skyscraper, built not just for office space, but as a monument, proof that the work of hands and steel in New Jersey could shape the skyline of New York. What does it mean when a factory becomes a world unto itself, and the world outside begins to change? Inside the Elizabethport plant, wartime necessity turned delicate hands and careful eyes from sewing machines to the strict tolerances of military hardware. The same floor that once echoed with the clatter of bobbins now rang with the measured strike of gauges and jigs, each tool fashioned for the Army's most demanding blueprints. In April 1940, the War Department issued Educational Order OR 396, a test not of volume, but of perfection. Singer's task: 500 model 1911 1 pistols, 45 caliber, each one stamped with the company's name and the city of Elizabeth, New Jersey. By December 1941, the run was complete. Serial numbers S801 through S80500, a set so limited that surviving examples would become legends in their own right. The rest of the plant focused on precision parts for artillery directors and aircraft. But those pistols, flawless, rare, and born from a shop built for thread, stand as a final proof of American craftsmanship. What remains when a company known for the everyday sews its name into the rarest steel? After the war, the Elizabethport plant pressed on, its vast halls still humming with industry as American families kept sewing and the world remembered the Singer name. But the market shifted. In the 1970s, Japanese companies like Brother and Juki began flooding stores with cheaper, precision-made machines. Orders dwindled. The old factory, once a city within a city, shrank year by year. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, only industrial machines were assembled on those worn floors. The workforce that once numbered in the tens of thousands fell to fewer than 1,000. Then, in February 1982, the announcement came. The 1.4 million square foot Elizabethport factory would close its doors. A century of American manufacturing ended not with a single blow, but with a long silence. What is left behind when the heart of a company stops beating, but the brand name lingers on? After the last whistle blew at Elizabethport, the Singer name became a pawn in a game of leverage and debt. In the late 1980s, Semitech, a Canadian-Hong Kong conglomerate, took control, stacking the company's future on a mountain of bonds, $650 million due, with little left in the till. When Semitech's German subsidiary FAF collapsed, the weight became unbearable. In 1999, Singer filed for bankruptcy in New York, a downfall so complete that Forbes called it the wrecking of Singer. Ownership passed from one firm to the next: Kohlberg, then the Swedish Viking Group, then SVP Worldwide. Each time a little less of the old company remained. By 2021, Platinum Equity took over, promising transformation. But the machines bearing the Singer name were now built in China, Vietnam, and Thailand. Millions of units ship each year, yet the soul of the brand, its American steel, its factory pride, has vanished. In January 2024, fire swept through the abandoned Elizabethport plant. The last red bricks fell, and with them, the final trace of a world where craftsmanship meant more than a trademark. What endures when a company's name outlives the hands that built it? Today, the last Singer machine built in New Jersey bears a 1982 serial number, a relic of vanished American industry. Craftsmanship gave way to contracts, legacy to leverage. What endures is a name, hollowed by time and transaction. In the quiet, we mourn what capital can never stitch back together.